Okay, let's unpack this, because if you look at your bank account right now, it tells a story.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not a story about your salary. It's actually a story about your identity. I mean, we typically think of building wealth as, I don't know, like assembling a massive piece of furniture in the dark without a manual. You have all these scattered pieces.
Right, like a paycheck here, an investment account there, maybe a credit card.
Exactly. But the instructions are written in this dialect of Wall Street jargon that's basically designed to make you feel like you need an advanced degree just to survive.
It's totally overwhelming for most people.
It really is. But our mission for this deep dive today is to kind of synthesize a really impressive stack of sources. We're looking at insights from Marco's Whiteboard Finance, Amplify Finance, Sharon Srivatsa, and some great excerpts from the audiobook of The Secrets of the 1%.
Yeah, and when you put all those together, a completely different reality emerges.
Totally. We're going to uncover the psychological shift you need to build wealth, the stark mathematical difference between long-term wealth and just making quick cash, and we'll even give you a practical checklist to automate your finances. Plus, how to bulletproof your mind against market panics.
Which is huge, because wealth, at the end of the day, isn't really a math problem, it's an identity shift.
Okay, an identity shift. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's a fundamental rewiring of how you interact with capital. The primary distinction between the 99% and the 1% isn't found in their gross income. It's the shift from a consumption mindset to an ownership mindset.
Right, so consumer versus owner.
Exactly. So a consumer views a dollar as like a coupon, something to be redeemed for a depreciating good. But an owner views a dollar as a worker. Its sole purpose is to go out and acquire productive nodes, basically assets that generate more money.
It's like looking at a dollar bill and seeing a seed to plant an orchard rather than a snack to eat right now. Oh, I love that. That's a perfect analogy, because you have to ask yourself, how many of your dollars are working out there in the orchard, and how many are just sleeping or being eaten right now?
Yeah, but let me push back on that a bit, because telling someone listening right now to just adopt an ownership mindset.
Right.
I mean, it sounds a little like standard motivational speaking.
Sure can sound fluffy.
Right. But the sources highlight this buy and build law, which I think provides the actual mechanical framework for this. So how does this law function for, someone looking at their regular paycheck this Friday?
Well, the buy and build law basically dictates that he who gives the money has the power. If you analyze the Forbes 400 list, the number of individuals who got there solely by saving a W-2 salary is precisely zero.
Wow, literally zero.
Literally zero. They reach that tier by acquiring an asset and forcing its appreciation. The sources actually use some really high-profile examples to show the scale of this, like Elon Musk buying Twitter for $44 billion.
Or Mark Cuban buying the Mavericks for $285 million, and then he later sells a majority stake at a $3.5 billion valuation. Or Facebook buying Instagram.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you there. Because using billionaires buying tech platforms or sports franchises, that's a massive leap from an individual investor trying to decide between buying a dividend ETF and, upgrading their smartphone.
I know, it sounds miles apart.
It really does. What is the actual mechanism connecting Mark Cuban to a regular retail investor?
So the underlying mechanism is identical, regardless of scale. When Cuban bought the Mavericks, he didn't buy a static object, right? He bought a cash-generating engine that was just underperforming. He used capital to secure equity, and then he applied leverage to build its value.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, and for the retail investor, it's the exact same thing. When you choose to deploy $1,000 into a broad market index fund instead of buying a new phone, you're literally purchasing fractional equity in the top 500 cash-generating engines in the country.
Right, you're just outsourcing the build phase to the CEOs of those companies.
Precisely. The consumer destroys capital for dopamine. The owner deploys capital for leverage.
So it's like the difference between buying a video game to play on the weekend versus renting out server space to host a software product that charges users a monthly subscription.
Exactly.
Both require upfront cash, but one bleeds value while the other captures it 24/7. So for you listening right now, the immediate audit is super simple. Look at your last 10 transactions. How much of your capital was deployed to capture value, and how much was just destroyed for comfort?
And that raises a really important point, because if your goal is to aggressively deploy capital into assets, you immediately run into this tension between saving and investing.
Oh, man. Yeah, the financial industry does a terrible job of distinguishing the two. They treat saving and investing like they're totally interchangeable words.
But their functions are fundamentally opposed. Saving is defensive, investing is offensive.
Right. Now, I know our audience here understands the baseline requirement of an emergency fund. We really don't need to rehash the basic save 6 to 12 months of expenses rule.
Yeah, that's table stakes.
But the more interesting debate the sources bring up is the opportunity cost. I mean, if inflation is running at elevated levels, having a massive cash moat is actively losing purchasing power. Isn't hoarding a year of cash just a guaranteed, mathematically proven loss?
It is a guaranteed loss, absolutely.
Yeah.
But you have to view that inflation decay not as a loss, but as an insurance premium.
Okay, an insurance premium. Explain that.
You're basically paying the inflation tax to protect your investments. The entire purpose of that cash shield is to prevent a scenario where, let's say, you lose your job during an economic downturn.
Which is exactly when markets usually crash.
Right. And if you don't have savings, you're forced to liquidate your investment portfolio at the absolute bottom just to pay your mortgage. So saving protects the machine, but investing is the machine.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Which bridges us directly into how that machine operates over time, and really the core differences between long-term wealth versus quick cash.
Oh, this is such a crucial distinction.
Yeah, and Sharon Srivatsa tells this amazing story in the sources about his early days in real estate that perfectly exposes the friction of chasing fast money.
Right. This is his money loves speed, but wealth loves time principle. He talks about his experience flipping 100 homes over 5 years. He'd find off-market deals, renovate them, sell them for a profit. And it was this high-velocity operation that generated a ton of quick cash.
A ton of cash, yeah. But let's look at the friction of that speed. To flip 100 homes, he had to trigger 100 separate taxable events.
Paying short-term capital gains on every single one.
Exactly. Plus absorbing 100 sets of closing costs, real estate agent fees, title insurance. He essentially created a highly stressful, heavily taxed second job for himself. Meanwhile, his friend takes a completely different path during that exact same 5-year window.
Yeah, the friend just bypassed velocity entirely. He purchased one single-family home, allowed it to appreciate, extracted the equity, and rolled it into a fourplex.
And then just waited again.
Yep. Waited again, then rolled that equity into a 20-unit apartment complex. He never actually flipped a single property.
And the net worth of the friend who held the 20 units was 5 times higher than Sharon's after 5 years. 5 times. Why? Because holding bypasses transaction friction. You aren't constantly resetting your tax basis. You're using the power of time.
And exactly the same mathematics apply to the stock market. The sources really highlight the staggering nature of compounding here. Like, if you invest just $500 a month at an 8% return starting at age 25, you cross the $1 million threshold by age 65.
$1 million just from $500 a month.
Yeah, but if you wait just 10 years until age 35 to deploy that exact same system, your end result collapses to roughly $566,000.
Wait, really? A 10-year delay costs you nearly $500,000.
$500,000 in lost compound interest. It's crazy. It's like Warren Buffett's strategy of buying high-quality companies and holding them forever. That allowed Berkshire Hathaway to compound at nearly 20% annually, which drove a 5 million % total return.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. If wealth loves time, isn't it super tempting to just chase high-risk, quick cash? Because waiting 40 years feels completely impossible for most people.
Of course it does. Human nature wants the payout today.
Right. And also, isn't the buy and hold forever advice laced with dangerous survivorship bias? We always hear about holding Berkshire or Amazon forever, but what if you held Enron or Lehman Brothers or Blockbuster forever?
Yeah. Holding a dying asset for 40 years is financial suicide.
Exactly.
And that is precisely why the definition of the asset matters so much.
Right.
The wealthy aren't blindly holding single points of failure. They are holding systems of value creation.
Like an index fund.
Yes. An S&P 500 index fund, for instance, is totally self-cleansing. The dying companies naturally rotate out, and the emerging companies rotate in. You aren't betting on a single horse. You own the whole racetrack.
Oh, I like that. You own the racetrack.
Yeah, because the goal isn't just to wait. It's to build a structural pipeline of passive cash flow, rather than constantly carrying buckets of water from the well. Quick cash is just a bucket. It empties the very moment you stop working. Time horizon investing is constructing the plumbing.
But plumbing requires upfront capital to build, which means we really need to talk about execution. Philosophy is useless without mechanics.
Very true.
Since the sources emphasize that the 1% don't rely on willpower but on structure, we have to provide a checklist. The sources bring up the classic 50-30-20 budgeting rule based on after-tax net income.
Right, so that's 50% for needs, 30% for wants, and 20% for investing in debt.
But let's be radically honest here. In modern high cost of living cities, treating the 50-30-20 rule as a rigid dogma feels incredibly archaic. If housing alone eats 45% of your net take-home pay, that 50% needs bucket is instantly shattered.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the 1% don't actually view the 50-30-20 rule as a permanent destination. They view it as an entry-level diagnostic tool.
Diagnostic, okay.
Yeah, it forces you to aggressively track your spending for 1 month. That's step 2 on the checklist, actually. First, calculate your monthly after-tax net income. Then, track spending for a month to identify the invisible capital leaks. The takeout, the micro-subscriptions, those daily frictions bleeding your deployable capital.
And then step 3 is the golden rule, right? Pay yourself first.
Exactly. It's the financial equivalent of an oxygen mask. But as your income scales, the ratio has to invert. The wealthy don't cap their investing at 20%, they cap their lifestyle, which allows their investment ratio to expand to 40, 50, or even 60%.
Which leads to step 4, the actual mechanism for doing that. Setting up an automatic transfer from your salary account to your investments immediately after the paycheck hits, before you even see it.
Yes, because you have to automate the extraction of capital. Willpower is a depletable resource. If you wait until the end of the month to invest whatever's left over, you're going to find that your expenses have miraculously expanded to consume your entire income.
It's basically Parkinson's law, right?
Exactly. Work expands to fill the time allotted, and financially, expenses expand to consume the capital available. That's why step 5 is using free tools like Mint, Good Budget, or just automated brokerage transfers to remove human error. You architect a machine that forces you to live on an artificial scarcity.
So what does this all mean for the listener who struggles with lifestyle creep? Like you get a raise or a massive year-end bonus. It's so easy for the wants to magically disguise themselves as needs.
Oh, lifestyle creep is dangerous. But this is where the discipline of delayed gratification really separates the consumer from the owner. When the middle class receives a capital injection, they immediately upgrade their lifestyle. But when the wealthy receive a capital injection, they upgrade their systems.
Meaning they purchase more assets.
Exactly. They aren't swearing off luxury forever, though.
Yep.
They just shift the funding source. They buy the luxury car later, utilizing the passive profits generated by the newly acquired assets, rather than draining their primary income.
So they never killed the goose to buy the car, they just used the golden eggs.
That's it exactly.
Okay, so let's say you've adopted the owner identity, you understand the mathematical superiority of time over velocity, and you have automated your capital deployment with the checklist. You should be bulletproof. But there is a final boss, basically, an existential threat to wealth building.
And it has absolutely nothing to do with the Federal Reserve or tax policy.
Right, it is your own emotional intelligence during a market crisis. The sources make this profound observation. Money doesn't change you, it reveals you.
Yes, it acts as a massive amplifier of your internal psychology. If you inherently link your self-worth to your net worth, market volatility will absolutely destroy you.
Because when the market drops 20%, your brain doesn't just see a fluctuation in asset pricing, it interprets it as a direct assault on your personal value and your safety.
And that's why fear is categorized in the sources as a silent tax. It drains your wealth because it forces you to violate the basic mechanics of investing. You panic and sell at the bottom just to relieve the psychological pressure.
But the 1% do not panic. They maintain calm during volatility.
Right, they prepare for markets rather than trying to predict them. They hold cash reserves precisely so they don't have to panic sell. Emotional intelligence is what allows them to operate countercyclically. They become aggressive buyers when the general public is aggressively selling.
But operating countercyclically requires an incredibly strict framework for risk management and sizing your bets. Sharon Srivatsa shares this brutal anecdote in the sources about the rule. Don't bet the empire for a pot of gold.
Oh, that story is heartbreaking.
It really is. He talks about a man who spent 15 years systematically saving $700,000 with his wife. Literally their entire life's work. And a trusted friend pitches him an oil and natural gas syndication. Great tax advantages, massive projected returns.
And he takes the entire $700,000 and deploys it into this single deal.
And what happens? 2 years later, the market shifts, the deal collapses, and 15 years of stored capital vanishes permanently. Gone.
which is just devastating. And the fundamental error there wasn't investing in energy, and it wasn't even trusting the friend. The catastrophic error was position sizing.
He bet the machine to get an extra output from the machine.
Exactly. You never risk the foundational architecture that generates your security for a single jackpot. And this introduces Ray Dalio's concept of asymmetric risk.
Right, which is huge.
Amateur investors look at an opportunity and ask, how much money can I make? They focus entirely on the upside while completely ignoring the probability of ruin.
But asymmetric risk, that's one of those concepts that gets thrown around a lot, but rarely explained mechanically. How do you actually structure a bet where the downside is strictly capped, but the upside is functionally limitless?
Well, it requires structuring the legal and financial parameters of the deal. So in public equities, it might mean using options contracts to strictly define your maximum loss before you even enter the trade.
Okay, that makes sense.
And in private deals, it involves utilizing non-recourse debt or entering syndications where your legal liability is strictly limited to your initial capital injection. The expert investor looks at a deal and asks, how can I engineer this so that my absolute worst case scenario is a minor survivable paper cut, but my upside remains uncapped?
It's like the difference between a thermostat and a thermometer. A thermometer just reacts to the temperature of the market spiking and dropping. But a thermostat, which is your emotional intelligence, actually sets the temperature and stays steady regardless of the weather outside. The goal isn't to hit a home run every time you step to the plate. The goal is to structure your life so you never ever get permanently kicked out of the stadium.
What's fascinating here is that true financial peace isn't actually about hitting a specific net worth number. It is about protecting your cognitive energy.
Protecting your energy, yeah.
It means intentionally limiting your exposure to the panic of the 24-hour financial news cycle, ignoring the speculative hype of the crowd, and just never executing a financial maneuver from a state of anxiety or restlessness.
Man, we have dissected a massive amount of mechanics today. Let's pull all these threads together for you listening. We started with the foundational identity shift, ceasing the destruction of capital as a consumer and beginning the deployment of capital as an owner.
Shifting from saving just to spend to investing to own.
Exactly. We stripped away the illusion of quick cash, exposing the friction of speed versus the mathematical dominance of long-term wealth. And we bypassed the archaic dogma of budgeting by focusing on the mechanics of automation, architecting systems that physically route capital to investments before your lifestyle can creep up to consume it.
And we anchored all of those mechanics in the absolute necessity of emotional intelligence and asymmetric risk, ensuring that when the inevitable market shocks occur, your calm mindset and your position sizing protect you from ruin.
But there's one final critical insight from the sources that kind of underpins everything we've talked about today. It wasn't deeply explored, but it builds perfectly on all this material. It's the concept of the psychology of enough.
Which is perhaps the most difficult variable to master, because the financial industry actively conditions you to never be satisfied.
Right. If you never definitively define what enough is for you, you will permanently reside in a state of mental poverty, regardless of whether your net worth is 100,000 or 100 million.
The goalpost will just continually recede into the distance.
You will keep risking the empire for pots of gold you don't even need. So, as you sit down this week to automate your investments with that checklist, you have to ask yourself a deeper question. What is your actual mathematical definition of enough? Because the very second you define that finish line, you become structurally and psychologically unshakable.
And that is the ultimate utility of wealth, not consumption, but autonomy.
Absolutely beautifully said. Thank you for spending your time with us as we dissected the sources on this deep dive. Our challenge to you is simple. Don't just absorb this as passive entertainment. Pick one mechanism we discussed today, whether it's automating a transfer, tracking your spending, or defining your number for enough, and execute it today. The blueprint is in your hands. Now go lay the first brick.